After I speak, there's going to be a 9-minute video showing an initiative that I started, initiative of mine called Vets Town Hall. It is about community. It does put people in the same room, people who think differently, feel differently. It puts them in the same room to listen to what our veterans have to say about their service. So after I speak, we'll watch that together. And we have a tent on the far side of the grounds here, right by the, it's not well signed, but it's right by the U.S. Army recruitment tent, which is hard to miss. So it's right by that. And Kristen is running the tent, and I hope you go over there and talk to her. Right now, I want to talk about an ancient human activity: walking, running, rucking, moving across the lands, carrying everything you need on your back. In evolutionary terms, humans are really good at it. And doing it is really good for humans. We are wired psychologically, emotionally, physically to use our bodies in extraordinary ways. And the problems start not when we do that, but when we stop doing it. We can move better, more efficiently, more effectively than just about any animal. I mean, there are animals that can run faster, but no animal, no mammal has the breadth of ability from sprinting to long distance that humans have, and partly because we can perform in the heat because we sweat. There's an amazing race out west called the Western States 100. It's 100 miles over the Sierra Nevada at 300,000 feet of elevation gain or something insane like that. I don't know what it is, but it's totally inhuman. And the guy who set the record at 14 hours and change, he ran that course. They also run horse and rider teams over the same course. He ran that course faster than every single horse and rider team ever, except one. Right? So even against horses at long enough distances, humans do pretty well. The 1,000-mile record, the human 1,000-mile record, is 10 days. At that pace, you could cross this continent in a month. And another thing that we can do, and this is where the rucking comes in, and I know you guys know all about that, we can carry half our body weight 20, 30 miles a day, almost indefinitely. No other animal can do that. A horse can't carry half its body weight. But humans can do that. So humans are, in some ways, almost superhuman in what they can do. Wolves can outpace us, but not in the heat. When you put us in the heat, we win everything. And what that means, what mobility means in historical terms, is that humans can maintain their freedom, their autonomy, by staying out of the reach of more powerful groups. And one of the things, and we learned this in Afghanistan, our U.S. military did, is that with strength and size and power come lack of agility, lack of mobility, comes slowness, right? I mean, the guys that I was with in Afghanistan, they wouldn't go on combat patrols carrying 100 pounds. You just can't run very fast with 100 pounds. The guys that they were fighting would have like 3 magazines and some peanuts in their pocket, and they could move whatever. I mean, they could literally move 3 or 4 times as fast as American soldiers, who are very fit people, right? But they were carrying so little that they could sort of run circles around us. That kind of mobility is a real asset in combat and in life. It means that empires have a very hard time controlling mobile societies. Mobility is a form of freedom. I think it's a form of psychological freedom at the individual level, and it's a form of political and social freedom at the societal level. So a great example of this is when the Spaniards got to the American Southwest in the 1600s. They were not known for their gentleness and human understanding, right? When they got there, not one of their particular traits. They were absolutely brutal to the native populations. And the native populations, there are basically 2 types. There were the Pueblo societies that were very wealthy, They were agriculturalists. They lived in these heavily fortified towns on top of pueblos. And then there were their poorer neighbors, the Apache, the Comanche, the Navajo. And they were very mobile, very poor people that were constantly on the move. The Spaniards rolled the Pueblo societies immediately, sometimes within hours, and subjugated them. The Apache remained free for almost 300 years because they were so mobile. The last band of free Apache gave themselves up in the late 1880s. My grandmother was born in 1900. They almost lasted into my grandmother's lifetime, a woman I knew very well. So the Apache warriors were expected to be able to move 70 miles a day, 70 miles a day for days on end. At night, children would sleep with food tied around their waist in case the camp was attacked, and they could get up and run and would have food with them. They were the ultimate mobile society. So one of the interesting things about societies like that is they're very egalitarian. I think you probably have noticed, if you've been in small groups in rough situations, in the wilderness, camping or whatever, in combat, is that as things get harder physically and psychologically, and people become more interdependent on each other for survival, differences stop mattering, right? Like of religion, of race, socioeconomic, and nothing matters, right? I mean, high school, things really do. You're good looking or not good looking, that's a devastating difference between people. At least I remember it that way, right? But it does not matter in a platoon in combat or on a camping trip, right? And so that egalitarianism, you can only own as much as you can carry. So a mobile society, you can't carry very much. So it's much more egalitarian, and we know, and this is true in modern societies, that egalitarian societies tend to produce people that are happier. And one of the problems with the incredibly high rates of depression and suicide in our society is one of the and the growing sort of mortality rates. One of the reasons is that it's a less and less egalitarian society, and that has real consequences, real effects. Well, mobility tends to create egalitarian relationships, which are happier. So the result is that people often want to be with the more mobile society. There are many historians who believe that the Great Wall of China was built not so much to keep the quote Mongol hordes, right? The nomadic society, steppe societies, not so much to keep them out, but to keep the Chinese farmers in, to keep them from joining Genghis Khan and his quote hordes. So they're more egalitarian, they're happier, and let's just face it, they're cooler, right? Like Hollywood, they make movies about cowboys, not about farmers. You know what I mean? Like motorcycle gangs are cool. The bowling league isn't as cool. Like there were so many examples of like these sort of mobile groups that are fascinating. They capture our attention. The last group I'll mention, that my favorite mobile society, are the Scythians. They were these sort of wild-haired, horseback riding nomads on the eastern steppe that were harassed. They smoked a lot of pot and they fought everybody, right? So King Darius, it's like a couple of thousands of years ago, King Darius set out with the greatest army ever assembled to defeat the Scythians, and he marched forth and he chased the Scythians over hill and dale for days and days. And finally the Scythians said, okay, we'll fight you. And they turned around. And they were going to get annihilated, right? This was the most powerful army in the world. And the armies drew up and faced each other across the battlefield. And one of the things about mobile societies is they often have a very cavalier relationship with death, which is an adaptive thing in evolutionary terms, and to not be paralyzed by the fear of dying. And so the Scythians drew themselves up across from Darius's great army. And while they were waiting for the battle to begin, Darius noticed that, they're separated by a couple hundred yards, right? Darius noticed that the Scythians got bored and they started hunting rabbits in the underbrush while they were waiting. And it so unnerved him, their casualness about what was so unnerved him, that he turned and left, and he didn't fight them. So how do you get something of that in your life? We all, I mean, virtually all of us, I think, here live in houses. We're basically a sedentary society. How do you incorporate that, a little bit of that in your life? Because it's enormously healthy. And one way that I found was something that I called the last patrol. So I took a couple of guys that had been in the platoon I was embedded with in Afghanistan and out at OP Restrepo, and a Spanish journalist that I knew who was holding my best friend's hand when he bled out in combat in Libya. And he and I became friends, a Spanish journalist named Guillermo Cervera. And the four of us set out from Washington, D.C. to walk along the railroad lines from D.C. Our idea was to walk from D.C. to Philly to New York. And we got to Philly, and then we turned west and headed for Pittsburgh. We walked throughout the course of a year, through snowstorms, through 110-degree heat index, through everything. The thing about railroad lines, it goes through the middle of everything. Ghettos, industry, rich suburbs, wilderness, farms. It goes through the middle of everything. You really see America from the inside out. And it's all sort of no man's land, right? I mean, it's totally illegal to be on there, right? So no one's on there except other people who are also breaking the law. So they're very careful with you, and you're very careful with them, and everyone's cool with each other, right? And you just have to avoid the police, and sometimes the locals, and particularly in Pennsylvania. And so, now Pennsylvania is an amazing state, but there was so much gunfire in that state, like we thought we were in like a low-level insurgency. It was amazing. It was just gunfire all the time. So we were sleeping under bridges and in abandoned buildings, getting our water out of creeks, cooking over fires. The police were looking for us a fair amount. At one point, the Air National Guard had a helicopter looking for us. They didn't catch us, and the bird was up there looking for us, and we were like in the tall grass in this field. And I was like, the only time in my life I've sort of felt like Taliban. I was like, oh, this is what those guys felt like. And they didn't find us, and no harm. I hope no harm, no foul. But anyway, we kept going, went all the way to Pittsburgh. And later I wrote a book called Freedom, about freedom, what it means and how societies maintain their freedom. And not only are humans very mobile, but we're the only species that a smaller individual or a smaller group can defeat a larger one. The rest of the animal kingdom, the big guy wins, basically. Not with humans. It's extraordinary. And because of that, humans can maintain their freedom against a larger oppressor. But so while I'm sort of mulling this over, I thought, what was the freest I've ever been in my life? And a lot of ways of defining it. If you make a bunch of money, you have economic freedom, but you might be pretty tied down in your schedule because you're working like crazy. If you're not working like crazy, you have time, but no money, right? I'm a dad. I'm 61. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and right now, my whole life is sort of devoted. It revolves around my family and my wife, and I feel like I have an enormous amount of emotional freedom. Like they are the thing that matters most, and I don't have to sort of, in my mind, my ego or whatever doesn't have to worry about anything else. Like it just doesn't matter. It's a huge, incredibly important form of freedom, is to be content with yourself, where you're at in life. But there's also another one that occurred to me and really intrigued me. During the last patrol, and by the way, I made a documentary out of it. I had a cameraman with us, a good friend, and so I made a film called The Last Patrol for HBO. It's on HBO Go if you're interested in watching it. But looking back as I wrote my book, Freedom, I thought, what was the freest I've ever been? And I realized that during the last patrol, virtually every night, we were the only people in the world who knew where we were. Nobody else knew. And that's an interesting form of freedom. I wouldn't want to live that way all the time, but little doses of that with people you're very close to is completely intoxicating. And I'll end with this, in case you're thinking wow, that sounds like a horrible experience. Why would I do that to myself? We were going through Pennsylvania in the middle of the winter. It was freezing cold. It was 15 degrees at night. We didn't have tents or anything, right? We had tarp that we'd put up sometimes. And we had a dog. I put my dog in the sleeping bag when it got really cold. Like, it was rough out there. And we saw a car up ahead on the railroad lines, and we had to be very careful with the cops. So I had a pair of binoculars, and I glassed the car, and it didn't look like a cop car. We sat for a while, and the figured out it was just a guy who was sitting there. So we sort of kept walking, and he got out of the car. He was amazed. We came walking out of a snowstorm along the railroad tracks, and he sort of asked us what we were doing. I said, well, we're headed for Pittsburgh. And he's like, what? You're headed for Pittsburgh? That's like 200 miles away, right? And I said, yeah, we're just doing our thing. And he said, listen, can you just give me like 15 minutes? Can you just wait here for 15 minutes? I was like, why? And he said, I'm going to go home. I'm going to throw some stuff in a bag. I'm going to come back. I want to go with you guys. I was like, I don't know what kind of marriage you're in or whatever, but frankly, I would go home and fix that before you join. But, the point is that if you're in, and I'm going to end because I'm in the red here, if you're a life in a fixed place is a wonderful thing. It's stable, it's safe, it's secure. It's a lot of great, important things, and everyone should be so lucky to have that. But just because it's a good thing doesn't mean it doesn't have downsides. And one of the ways to mitigate the downsides is to do something like what we did. It was one of the very best things I've ever done, and frankly, I wish I could go back out. I can't because I have 2 little girls, but I wish I could go back out there. So I hope you watch the film. Right now, we're going to run a video about Veterans Town Hall. And I hope you are moved and inspired to take us up on our offer to run a town hall in your hometown, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for the chance to talk to you, and have a great weekend.